And welcome all to today's live classroom for biology. Today we're going to talk about macromolecules. So all living things are made of the same four macromolecules of life. So what is a macromolecule? Well, let's start with the word molecules. A molecule is two or more atoms, different atoms of different elements bound together with a chemical bond. And remember from class, chemical bonds are just simply the pairing of electrons. Electrons don't like to be single. That's why we have electronsonly.com. And when electrons meet other eligible electrons, they pair up. And that forms a chemical bond. So what is a molecule? It's two or more atoms of different elements that have shared their electrons, and they are now tightly linked together. What is a macromolecule? Macro means large. So if you have many atoms all bound together in the same molecule, you have a macromolecule. Well, you see, all living things are made of the same four macromolecules of life. How do we remember these four macromolecules? Well, we clap for them. C-L-A-P. And that's why it's right here. We clap for them. C for carbohydrates, L for lipids, A for nucleic acids, P for proteins. So let's start with C. What do you have to know about carbohydrates? That's what the 4 is for. F for function, O for monomers, and R for arrangement. Function. What does that macromolecule do? Why is it important? Monomer. See, mono means one. A monomer is a single small subunit. So what we find is these macromolecules of life are built from repeating small subunits. You take a small subunit and you link a bunch of them together. So they're repeating, and now you have a macromolecule. So those repeating small subunits are called monomers, and when they get linked together, they're called polymers. A poly, the word poly means many, so a mono, one subunit, a poly, many subunits. A macromolecule is many subunits, a polymer. But you need to know what the macromolecules are made of. So what are they made of? They're made of the monomers. And then you also have to know how they are arranged. Now, their arrangement is basically, what do they look like in chemical form? And would you recognize them if they were drawn in their chemical form for what they are? So we have all three of those in front of you here in a table. We're going to start right here with carbohydrates. Carbohydrates give us quick energy. Your body is able to consume a carbohydrate and quickly absorb it into the bloodstream, and from the bloodstream it can be quickly absorbed into cells and quickly converted. The energy in the chemical bonds of the carbohydrate can be converted to energy in the bonds of ATP. Remember, if you want your car to run, to do work, you have to put gas in it. If you want a cell to do work, it needs to have ATP. A cell cannot run on anything else but ATP, so your cells have to be pretty good at making ATP. Your cells can take carbohydrates, rip them apart, capture the energy that was stored in the chemical bonds, the pairing of electrons, and convert that chemical energy to chemical energy stored in the chemical bonds in ATP. So carbohydrates give us quick energy because your body can quickly absorb them, quickly convert the chemical energy in the carbohydrates to chemical energy in ATP. What do carbohydrates look like over here? Well, we have a 6-member ring right here. and we have a 5-member ring right here. So the 6-member ring we're going to call glucose, and the 5-member ring, fructose. This glucose molecule, this 6-member ring, and this fructose molecule, the 5-member ring, both of them are made, every dot on this ring is a carbon except for the red dot. The red dot is an oxygen molecule. So when carbohydrates form rings like this, and they always do, you're going to see mostly carbon atoms on the ring, and in one spot there will be an oxygen atom. And it doesn't matter if it's the 6-member ring called glucose or the 5-member ring called fructose, it will be the same. So notice the red atom here is oxygen. If you were to trace only the carbon atoms, whoops, let me push that button. We're tracing only the carbon atoms. You can see me going back and forth on this, and as I trace only the carbon atoms, I make the letter C. C for carbohydrate. And it works the same over here with the 5-member ring. If I trace only the carbon atoms, I make the letter C. So, carbohydrates, their function, quick energy. Their arrangement, 6-member ring, 5-member ring, one member of the ring is oxygen, the rest are carbon. How do you build a carbohydrate? What are the monomers that carbohydrates are built from? Well, carbohydrates are sugars. The Greek word for sugar is saccharide. So if you went over to Greece and you're sitting in an outdoor cafe and it's sunny and there's this light breeze and it's about 10 in the morning and everything just seems perfect, so you order yourself a glass of iced tea. But of course, if you're having iced tea, you're going to want a little bit of sugar with it. So you need to raise your hand, and when the server looks at you, you will say saccharide, saccharide, and they'll know that you want sugar with your iced tea. So how do you build a carbohydrate? Carbohydrates are called sugars. You build them one sugar at a time. Mono means one, right here, mono, and saccharide means sugar. How do you build a sugar? One sugar at a time. What sugars are they talking about? It's either one glucose or one fructose at a time. So you're going to add small repeating subunits, monomers, such as glucose and fructose together. And you're going to add a bunch of them, sometimes thousands of them together to form these large carbohydrate molecules. One might be starch or glycogen, where you have hundreds and thousands of these small repeating subunits here, glucose and fructose, all bound together to make this macromolecule called carbohydrate. So each small subunit is called a monosaccharide, and together, when you have a large number of them, you have a polysaccharide, saccharide meaning sugar. So let's move on. The second macromolecule of life, lipids, and that's right here with the L. What do lipids do? Lipids have a long list of functions, but I'm only going to give you one here, and that is energy. You can turn lipids, also known as fats, oils, and waxes, you can convert lipids into ATP. You can rip apart lipids, breaking those carbon-carbon bonds, harvesting high-energy electrons that get passed down the electron transport chain, pulling hydrogen ions across the membrane, using that chemoosmotic pressure to power ATP synthase to convert one ADP into one ATP. That was a mouthful, but if you've been in my class, you've heard that story before. So lipids. Lipids are fats, oils, and waxes, and they can be used as energy. They can also be used as hormones. And don't forget that lipids, there's a special lipid called a phospholipid, and that makes the plasma membrane one of the most important structures in a cell. The plasma membrane is a lipid bilayer, two layers of fat molecules arranged around every molecule. I'm sorry, every cell that has ever existed. And then if you're a eukaryotic cell, you have organelles, and every one of your organelles is also covered in a lipid bilayer. So, lipids can give us energy. They form the cell membrane. They wrap around organelles for eukaryotic cells. They can be hormones. Again, the list of what lipids can do is very long. What do lipids look like? Well, we're going to come over here to our arrangement column, and you're going to see that lipids are made of two things. We have glycerol. Do you see the word right here? Glycerol. Glycerol is this 3-carbon molecule. Do you see the 3 black dots? Each black dot represents carbon. So you have a 3-carbon molecule that's called glycerol, and attached to each one of those carbons is a fatty acid. And that's what this little unit is right here. So one glycerol molecule can contain up to 3 fatty acids. Here's 1, 2, and 3. Glycerol. So how do you make a lipid? 1 glycerol and up to 3 fatty acids. Now, what does a fatty acid look like? Well, you have this carboxylic acid. I'm going to try to blow this up a little bit and see what we get. You can see a red carbon that has a double bond to oxygen right here. And then going to the side of that carbon, there's another oxygen. And going to the other side, you see this squiggly green line with black dots. That squiggly line, everywhere there's a black dot, that represents a carbon. So this green line with the black dots represents a very long chain of repeating carbon atoms. So you have carbon, 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 going the whole way across. And you might have tens of them, or you might have hundreds of carbon atoms going out this chain. So this chain of carbon atoms, a long chain of carbon atoms, is called a fat, and this carbon double bond oxygen with oxygen on the other side is an acid. So you have a fat on one side and an acid on the other, and that's why we call it a fatty acid. This one unit right here is 1 fatty acid. This one unit is another fatty acid, and here's a third one. So glycerol, because it has 3 carbons, can hold up to 3 fatty acids. But you could, if you wanted to, you could drop this third fatty acid right here and instead put in a phosphate group, PO4. That's a phosphate group. Now, if you do that, what you have now is a phospholipid, and that's what makes the cell membranes. If you have 3 fatty acids attached to glycerol, it's called a triglyceride. And if you have 2 fatty acids in a phosphate group, it's a phospholipid. So we've already covered how to build the monomers that build lipids, that is glycerol and up to 3 fatty acids, and we're ready to move on to A for nucleic acids. Now, nucleic acids store information. There are 2 types of nucleic acids. There's DNA and RNA. I probably should have put that in here. So maybe underneath here you might put RNA. It's just as important as DNA. There are 2 types of nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. Nucleic acids are a polymer, right? The big macromolecule. And they're built from monomers called nucleotides. Nucleotides. So if you have a repeating group of nucleotides that are connected to each other, that's what creates a nucleic acid. So nucleotides are small, nucleic acids are big. What does a nucleotide look like? Well, they take a nap. Down here, you see a nitrogenous base, and it says NB. I don't know if I can blow it up enough for you to see the N the letter N and the letter B there, nitrogenous base. Now, it's a base that has a lot of nitrogen in it, nitrogenous base. And these nitrogenous bases give each nucleotide its identity, because that's the only thing that differs on them, are the different nitrogenous bases. And there's only a handful of different bases. Nucleotides are made from, they take a nap. The N is for nitrogenous base. The A is for the shape that the sugar gives it. Do you see the letter A here? So the A in NAP is for the shape that it gives the nitrogenous base, because this little 5-member ring, you've seen it before. You've seen that ring right here. It looks just like fructose, doesn't it? Well, this 5-member ring down here in the nucleotide, it's a cousin of fructose. They're closely related. It's not fructose. This sugar right here in the nucleotide is called ribose or deoxyribose, but it is very close in shape and in reactivity to fructose. So what do we know now? We know that nucleotides, right here, are made of a nitrogenous base, a sugar that gives it the shape of the letter A, and the P stands for a phosphate group, PO4. We talked about phosphate already. So PO4 right here. The sugar and the PO4 are always there. They don't change. The sugar is either going to be ribose or deoxyribose, and phosphate is always phosphate. So the only thing that really changes is the nitrogenous base, and you're either going to have sugar number 1 or sugar number 2. You're either going to have ribose or deoxyribose. Moving on, we have proteins. Proteins have the longest list of function of any of the macromolecules of life. Basically, if it can be done, there's probably a protein that does it. But I'm only going to give you one here, and that's enzymes. And enzymes are a special group of catalysts, and catalysts are anything that speed up chemical reactions by lowering activation energy. And that's part of the enzyme diagram. All enzymes are made of proteins. Proteins are a macromolecule of life, one of the big 4, and proteins are made from repeating small subunits called amino acids. Notice I turned the letter A sideways, and I pointed them away from each other. I did that for a reason. You see, amino acids have a very specific shape. Let's take a look at that shape. Here you see the letter P for protein. And if you turn the letter P sideways, wrong button. Here we go. You see how we turn the letter P sideways for protein? That is how you begin to make an amino acid. You turn the letter P sideways, and then you put this A. Do you see the A right here? You put the A from amino, the amine, right there, and you put the A for the acid right there at the bottom of the P and at the top of the P. And then you put in 3 dots here. The first dot's going to be nitrogen right there. The second dot's going to be carbon, and the third dot's going to be carbon. In the middle carbon, you're going to draw a line and you're going to put an R. And an R in biology means a variable. If we were in math and I asked you to give me a letter that represents a variable, I almost always get X as the answer. Well, you see, R is to biology as X is to math. This R group is the only thing that is going to change in an amino acid. All the rest of this is exactly the same for every single amino acid. This R group right here is the only thing that will change. There are 20 different amino acids, and that's something we probably should add right here. There are 20 different amino acids, which means there are 20 different R groups, because every amino acid has a nitrogen right here, and you see that letter A? Well, each line that comes off of the letter A represents a bond. That nitrogen has two hydrogens bound to it. Do you see how the one side of the A binds to that one and the other side binds to that one? And over here you have this carbon, and you have a double bond to oxygen going here, and you have a single bond to an OH group going there. That's an acid. In fact, that is exactly the same acid you saw right here. It's called a carboxylic acid. Do you see the double bond to oxygen and the single bond? So, every amino acid has a nitrogen with two hydrogens on this side called an amine, and it has an acid, a carboxylic acid, on this side. It has a central carbon, and that central carbon's bound to an R group, and that's a variable. There are 20 different R groups, and that gives you the 20 different amino acids. Those are the macromolecules of life. All living things are made of these 4 macromolecules. How do we remember them? We clap for them. CLAP. Carbohydrate, lipid, nucleic acid, and protein. What do we have to know about them? 4. Function, what they're built from, what are the small repeating subunits, the monomers, and R, arrangement. What do they look like? And I would want you to be able to reproduce this diagram as you see it now from memory. If you would like, you can take your microphones off of mute. If you have any questions, I'll field those questions now.